Hello, very beautiful community. Trump, Orbán, and Putin are planning a meeting in Budapest inside the European Union. Let's analyze this. And we're doing this as Mr. Zelensky is visiting the United States. But I wanted to focus on this Budapest meeting because I think it's important. Now, we're going to be unemotional and just give rapid analysis today. So bear with me. We'll jump through my thoughts in about 10 minutes. The first thing we've got to remember is that Mr. Trump has very few beliefs. Instead, he has fleeting dispositional states. That's really important, not just as a psychological insight about Trump, because it helps us understand how his mind works. He does have a small number of beliefs. For instance, his belief about tariffs from the 70s and 80s, and these beliefs are fixed and they don't change, but they're very small in number. As an informed citizen, you have many more beliefs than Trump. You have dozens upon dozens upon dozens of beliefs about politics, if you just stop and think about it. A professional political philosopher will have thousands upon thousands of beliefs about politics, some of which you'll find very pedantic, but they're beliefs. They're going to be things that are steadily held across months and years. It's not a belief if it's here today, gone tomorrow. It's a fleeting dispositional state. And Trump's action on the international stage is a combination of the expression of a very, very small number of fixed beliefs and then a plethora of fleeting dispositional states. This is important because if I open my news tabs on the internet, I see the words U-turn, change of mind, U-turn, change of mind. For instance, around Trump ventilating the Tomahawk idea and then taking it back. It is not right for journalists to keep saying that Trump has made a U-turn for the 11th time, or that Trump has changed his mind. There was no steady mind there to change in the first place. This reporting has got to be adjusted. Now, let's briefly look at what Trump has said. He posted while speaking to Putin that he was speaking to Putin, which is in itself a wonderfully transparent narcissistic act. It's as though I were having a cup of tea with, let's say, the philosopher Charles Taylor, and as we were having a cup of tea, I tweeted about what an amazing cup of tea I was having. And then after my cup of tea, I produced this. We've just had a great phone call. We talked about many things. We talked about Melania. We talked about how we're going to bring the water close. That, again, is an expression of narcissistic dependence on Putin, whereby Trump is initiating Putin and himself into a magical society he has concocted in his own imagination. So it's like me, having a cup of tea with Charles Taylor and talking about it not like I've had a cup of tea with somebody I admire, but as though something really incredibly big and incredibly profound and incredibly important happened in the world. And the two people involved were participants in it. And that Charles Taylor is not just the greatest living philosopher in the world, he's also probably the greatest person in the world. And it was just extraordinarily historic that we shared this space, because it's the sort of thing I do. I share magical and extraordinary spaces because I'm so magical and extraordinary. So the narcissistic dependence on Putin, right, is completely three-dimensionally alive there. Just a quick word on Putin's psychology. Don't underestimate how fearful Putin is, how mentally destroyed he is by overstay in power, how inflexible he is, and how poorly skilled he is at being able to look openly at risky but advantageous opportunities because of his sort of corrosive precautionary disposition that he has developed. Now, you might say, how on earth does that square with what he did in February 2022? It does square with that, and we can have a separate conversation about why Putin did this necessary and in his mind, his delusional mind, defensive act. Can Trump's Putin fancy just crumble in Budapest? We're getting some reports, which you should take with a few, it's not too many, but a few pinches of salt, about how Trump was irritated by Putin in Alaska. But the point is that it's virtually impossible for Putin to collapse in Trump's mind as an object of narcissistic supply, even if Trump has to turn more permanently away from Putin than he needs to, and than he ever has done thus far. He'll still walk around with images in his mind of how wouldn't it be marvelous if Putin and Trump could be reunited mellifluously on the global stage. But of course, what can always happen for a narcissistic personality is that one form of narcissistic supply can get outweighed by another. The narcissistic dependence on a particular tyrant could conceivably, doesn't mean that's likely, but could conceivably get outweighed by the narcissistic supply of being seen to stop a conflict and getting a Nobel Peace Prize. Now, why does Moscow want this meeting? I'm going to give a somewhat silly analogy, but I think it's helpful. Imagine a 27-year-old boy called Ricky in Paris, who is in a romantic relationship with his female partner. And imagine that Ricky is too immature to commit to his female partner, but he can't leave her either because she's too beautiful. Right? Let's say it's Emilia, and Ricky knows he can't be Emilia's life partner because he's still a child and he can't commit properly. He's not ready to have children, not ready to have a family. But he also knows that Emilia is so physically striking. He loves being seen in public with Emilia, just can't leave her. That, by the way, is not a hypothetical example. We actually have a micro-epidemic of that in our culture. Because of the crisis of men, we have more men than ever who are too weak to leave relationships for which they're not emotionally ready to. They're sort of holding their physically attractive romantic partners hostage. That could be a topic for another chat. What's happening with the Russians and Budapest is that they know they can't give the kind of concessions to Trump that he wants and he needs. But they can't say no to the extraordinary Trump opportunity either, even though they can only superficially grasp it, but can't follow through on the substance. So we can't let the opportunity that Trump is giving us go, but we can't follow through with it either. I'm apologizing for the ludicrousness of my example, but that's what you get today. Now, impact on Ukraine. Dispiriting. Don't forget that political speech and political events are themselves things that form political reality. They are, themselves significant. So, meetings about decisions, meetings about actions are actions themselves. And it's dispiriting for the West too, because we've got Trump supporting Orbán getting a big event at home to elevate his prestige, and Putin returning to the European Union. That's bad for the West, and it's not just bad optically, because optics like these are political events with a degree of transformational power in of themselves. Now, who is in a weaker and a stronger position relative to the Alaska calamity, about which we made a short reaction video on the main channel a few months ago? Ukraine's in a bad way. Ukraine's in real trouble economically. Ukraine is experiencing a degree of politicization of its domestic space. Ukraine is underarmed in a range of respects and is insufficiently armed at the level of surface-to-air weaponry. And Ukraine is entering the hardest winter of the war so far. But the Russians aren't in too pretty a state either. They're in a prettier state relative to Ukraine as far as Russian society goes, a much prettier state, but Putin is under very significant pressure. not just because the Russian economy is in trouble, but also because this would be Putin's fourth round of trying to make progress at the front line in the summer and early autumn and failing. So Putin has failed again and to make significant advances, and it's difficult for Putin, possible but difficult, to keep on trying and failing for another year. So if I were to balance this, I would say Putin is under a bit more pressure than he was in Alaska to make concessions, cumulatively speaking. But the trouble is that Putin is resplendently good at thinking he is in a strong position, whatever the actual state of his position is. What would a more competent and perhaps a somewhat more pro-Western and democratically minded Trump do in Budapest that the real Trump won't? Two things. That kind of fictional Trump would grasp what Putin wants, would realize that Putin is not conducting a territorial war, that Putin is not conducting a national security war, but that Putin is conducting a war that's A, about regime security at home, and B, about destabilizing Ukraine politically with a view of that acting as a lever, which in turn destabilizes the West politically, Western alliances and Western democracies domestically. So Trump doesn't grasp this. And he can't improve his understanding of Putin toward grasping this either, because of his combination of narcissism, pathologies, and his lack of self-awareness about his neurodiversities. He cannot learn, he cannot grow in this regard. He can't say, okay, this is my picture of Putin, give me some advice about this so that I improve my picture of Putin. He can't ask for the advice, he can't hear the advice. Which leaves him in the predicament of a kind of infantile pre-strategic way of relating to other leaders, whereby he puts front and center and makes nearly everything about the personal connection, the personal relationship. So he has a personal relationship with Putin, but beyond that, he cannot see what kind of agent Putin is strategically. It still keeps falling back to Vlad and Vlad did this, and I liked it, but then Vlad did that, and I didn't like it, but I'd love to like what Vlad does because I want to be close to Vlad, but sometimes he does things I don't like. Right? There's no even space for strategic clarity there. So that's one thing that a better Trump would do and a more pro-Western Trump would do. The second thing that a pro-Western Trump would do is use Putin's aspirations against him. And that's to say, put a deal on the table and succeed in selling it to Putin as though it weakened Ukraine more than it actually does, and as though it gave Putin more opportunities to weaken the West than it actually does. Putting something on the table that, in a bogus way, persuades Putin that the relative underminings that are going to result from the deal are going to affect Ukraine more than they affect Russia. Look, Ukraine's so toxic, it's going to collapse anyway in 2 or 3 years. Vlad, don't worry about it. Vlad, you're going to be reintegrated with the West more. Look, we've got an authoritarian revolution happening here. Anyway, that wouldn't be the language you'd use, but we've got a big change happening in Western politics, and you're going to like a lot more the kind of people that are coming to power. Go on, Vlad. It's just going to advantage you. At least that would be one way to proceed. Neither of these two things are available to the real Trump. And that's why I would recommend having extreme skepticism about Trump's capacity to be efficacious in a way that favors the West in Budapest. Enough. Lots of love. Talk soon.